Je comprends. On va faire sa session en anglais.
All right. So we can go ahead and get started. And as I mentioned, my session is going to be in English. In the next 20 minutes, we're going to look at a few tools from Google that can help you build your startup. A little bit of introduction. My name is John Kimani. I am part of the developer ecosystem team at Google. This is a team that works with developer communities and startups. Today, I have decided to talk about startups because it is an important topic for Africa, because we need to find ways of creating jobs for developers and for the young people in Africa. And so developers are going to help us to build startups. So developers like yourselves who are thinking about building a tech business, we have a few recommendations from Google. All right, so let's jump into it. What I have done is my presentation is going to focus on 6 steps when you're building a startup. And these 6 steps are: number 1, how do you create your team? Number 2, how do you build a minimum viable product? Number 3, when you're thinking about tech and infrastructure, how do you acquire customers? We'll touch a little bit on data and then focus on, once you have everything else in place, how do you grow your startup? If you have any questions, you can put them on chat, or you can simply raise your hand and I can answer your question. So let's jump into it. Let's start by looking at how you think about your team, right? The first step when you're thinking about a startup is forming your startup team, right? You have an idea, you're a software developer, but there are many other aspects to building a company. And so you need to build a team. What are some of the tools from Google that help you in this journey, right? To help you bring the right team is very, very important. You need to build a team that has the same vision. You need to set up a very good leadership, and then you need to set up good practices on how you hire, how you train your talent, how you grow your talent. And there's a very interesting statistic that says that majority of startups fail not because of the product, but because of the team. And so the team is very important. And so at Google, we've got a website known as Rework. And Rework basically is our HR team has been collecting best practices and guidelines over the last 20 years and putting all of these best practices together, right? These are basically practices when it comes to running and building a company. Everything from how do you set your goals, how do you set up your hiring process, how do you ensure that your company is innovative and is always creating new products, how do you train your employees, and then how do you get feedback from your employees, which is very, very important. And so if you go to that website, Rework, I'm going to share this presentation later, you can get an idea of some of the resources we have put together for you, all the research that we have been working on all these different aspects of building a team. And so basically, as you're setting up a team, you need to think about how do you set your goals for yourself as a founder and for your startup. How do you set up your hiring process, right? You remember when we said you need a team, you've got maybe a co-founder, there's 2 of you or 3 of you. You now need to bring on board other people to help you with different aspects. How do you hire these people? And how do you collect feedback from your employees? So all these tools and templates are there for you on the website that I mentioned, the website work. I'm going to share the links after so you can have a look at that. The second step, and I think this is where it begins to be interesting for developers like yourselves, is building a minimum viable product, right? This is the first product that you're going to take to market and test your users and see if this product makes sense for your customers. And so when you're building a minimum viable product, you need to think about a lot of things. It's basically taking your idea into an application. How do you move from idea to application? How do you get your idea off the ground with some of the tools that we have at Google? Number 1,
John, nous t'avons perdu.
Sorry about that. I think I dropped off. Can you hear me, Cyprien? Tu m'entends?
Yes, yes. We can
Okay.
hear you.
All right, thank you. Sorry, I'm just going to share my screen again. My connection dropped off. I was talking about building an MVP. Material design is very important because it helps you move your application from a sketch on paper to an application that people can work with. A few other aspects, if you're thinking about an Android application, we've got a program that we call Start on Android. Basically, it's an application that helps you, it's a process that helps you start the right way on Google Play. You can test out what we call Android's early access program. So how do you make your application available to a small group of people on Google Play, test out the application, collect feedback, and then be able to expand the scope of that application. The second aspect is if you're building a web application, you need to be able to collect analytics. And these analytics help your business grow by collecting data about how people are interacting with the application, right? So for example, where are your users coming from? How much time are the users spending on the application? What are some of the challenges they're getting on the application? If you've used Google Analytics before, it's a very useful tool for tracking traffic and the different sources. So that's something else that you have from Google in that end. If you're looking at building a web application, again, nowadays we've been talking about progressive web apps and making your web applications responsive and practical on mobile. Why is that important? For the developers in this room, you know that Africa is mobile first. In fact, in certain countries, Africa is mobile only. And so your users will be coming through mobile phones, smartphones. And so we've got applications like Lighthouse, which help you test and improve the quality of your web pages to ensure that your web pages are fast and your users are getting the right information at the right time. So all of this you can get from the Chrome DevTools portal. So just to summarize, we've got different tools to help you do different things. If you're looking at setting up your goals, analytics is there. When you're getting started, we've got a design sprint methodology. Material design helps you design your applications really well, modern applications, all the way down to Android's early access program, right? So this is step 2. So we started off with creating a team. Number 2 is creating a minimum viable product. Number 3, where do we go from there? We now start thinking about scale. In the event that my application grows very fast, I need to think about data storage. Where am I going to host this application? How am I going to analyze my data? And so you need to make decisions on tech. And these decisions are important because when your application starts to grow, the last thing you want is users dropping off because your backend is not robust enough or your APIs are not doing what they should be doing. Again, we've got a few tools you can consider. And at this point, I just wanted to mention, why should you trust us? We've got 9 products at Google with more than 1 billion users monthly, right? And so I would say this is an area of expertise for us, scaling, and all these products sit on our own platforms, right? And so when we tell you this platform is good, we've tested it ourselves. And basically, this is to introduce you to Google Cloud. I know we had a cloud conversation earlier on, and so I won't go into details on this. Google Cloud provides you with a lot of tools and services as a developer. If you're hosting a web application, you've got App Engine. App Engine supports a lot of programming languages, everything from proprietary languages down to open source languages like C#, Python, Java. All of that can be hosted on App Engine, and you can scale easily. There's a free tier, which is very, very generous. And so if your web application in the early days, if you don't have a lot of users, you're not paying for it. Google Cloud also has a lot of features on AI to help you with natural language processing, creating ML models, all of that. And recently we connected Google Maps with Google Cloud. And so this brings the two platforms together, makes it easier for you to connect. If you're looking at using some Google Maps platform APIs like geocoding, reverse addressing, if you're looking at adding Street View imagery to your application, all of that can be done very, very easily on Google Cloud. Something else you should probably consider when you're thinking about your front end is maybe thinking about, a web framework that is robust, that is open source, that has a lot of developers using it. And what better example than Angular? Angular helps you build modern applications. It makes your data binding so easy. And so it's easier for you to pull in data from an API to your front end. You're able to build responsive applications for mobile, but also for web and desktop. Angular is fast. It has a huge open source community and with support from Google. So you're guaranteed that this framework is going to be around for a very, very long time. Again, if you're thinking about cross-platform applications, Flutter is becoming a popular platform. It allows you to build beautiful native applications for Android, iOS, web, and now desktop. It's easy to get started. It uses a programming language that's very, very familiar to Dart. Dart is very familiar to JavaScript. If you're coming from C# or Java, it's very easy to use. So that's something else you should probably consider if you're thinking cross-platform. Right, and as I mentioned, Google Cloud has a lot of services and features for you as a developer. I'll share the link to the deck so you can have a look at some of this. If you're thinking about data storage, Cloud SQL is there for you. If you're looking for managed Postgres or MySQL, that's offered for you. If you're looking at NoSQL storage, then you've got options as well. You can consider all the AI capabilities that I mentioned. Finally, something that people tend to forget, right, is the fact that you remember we started off by building a team. That teams need to collaborate, right? And so you need a collaboration platform that's going to be reliable. And what better platform that Google Workspace? That's incorrect. I think I still have the old name. It's Google Workspace. And Cyprian is an expert with this. So if you have any questions on Workspace, you can send them to Cyprian as well. So once you have your team, you've got your minimum viable product, you've thought about your backend, now you need to go out and acquire customers, right? The reason why you're building a startup is that you need people to pay for it. And so we have tools that can help you scale from 0 to 100, 1,000, million customers quite easily. And some of these tools are here, right? The classic Google Ads. As developers, we often say that if you build a good application, people will come. That is not always the case. You have to ensure that you're acquiring your customers. You have to be intentional about acquiring customers. And so Google Ads can help you build amazing campaigns to be able to do that. On Google Play as well, there are ways of making your application discoverable. Once you deploy on Google Play, you're now looking at a global audience. Your application is no longer just limited to Cameroon. And so being able to tap into that global market is important. If you're building like a social platform or like an e-commerce site, YouTube is an interesting way of getting, your users to learn about how your platform works. And so sharing short format videos or even just long format tutorials, YouTube works really, really well for that. So there are different ways of acquiring customers through different platforms. Something else that's really, really important in this world that we live in is the fact that you're going to be collecting a lot of data from your customers. And you need to make sure that this data is safe and that you're following all the legal protocols locally and globally as well. And so our tools have been built with data compliance in mind. This is important for your user security, privacy, And I'm sure, as I mentioned, that you're meeting all the regulatory obligations, not just in Cameroon, but also around the world. Remember that this application is going to be used by many people all over the world. And so understanding, you know, policy frameworks like GDPR and what that means for your application, if some of your users are going to be coming from Europe, for example. And so the platforms that we have at Google already have already thought about these things. Google Cloud has independent verification on security, on privacy, and so once you deploy on Google Cloud, you're sure that your data is safe. We've got different security models you can look at, and so even as your application is scaling, these models on security and privacy and data compliance are going to be in place. Finally, step 6, you've built your MVP, you've tested it out with users, you've done all sorts of different tests, and you're starting to get users coming in. So the next thing you need to think about is scale. And how do you scale your startup? Here's some tools you should be thinking about. As I mentioned, you know, when you're moving from MVP to product market fit to scale, you need to make sure that you're getting feedback from your customers. And so for the designers in the room or the marketers in the room, A/B testing is very, very important. A/B testing is basically a scenario where you have, you know, an online service, and then you segment your users. You've got users in group A and in group B that are seeing a different set of features as a way of testing out your features before they roll out to everyone, right? This is something that's very common with Twitter, for example. They do a lot of A/B testing. You could be seated next to someone, and the application looks very, very different from yours, right? So it's a way of testing out the way users are interacting and collecting feedback at real time. Also consider doing classic Google surveys, right? For the users who have been with you for a long time, you could send them a form, you ask them questions. If you've used Google Forms before, this data is aggregated for you, and so it makes it easier for you to analyze. And that way, once you have these things in place, you're able to scale to a global market. This is for the marketers in the room. We've got a tool known as Market Finder, which helps you assess. If you're thinking about building a service for the world, it helps you assess different markets and whether that service would be useful in those different markets, right? And so Market Finder is something interesting and worth looking at. Right, so as I mentioned, as you scale your startup, there are different tools that can help you scale the right way. And so once again, Google offers different services for you to be able to grow your company. So just to recap, so we said there's 6 steps to building a startup with the best of Google. We help you create your team. We provide you with guidelines and best practices from our own people operations. We help you build a minimum viable product. We help you move that minimum viable product to product market fit. We support you as you're trying to make the right decisions on tech and infrastructure. When you're acquiring customers, when you're thinking about data security and compliance, and finally, when you want to scale and grow your company. Cool. So those are the 6 points I wanted us to look at. I don't see any questions on chat. Anyone with a question that would want to raise? All right. Apologies. I know the session was in English, which is not ideal. Thank you, Adam. I'm going to share this link with Cyprian, and then he's going to send it over to you so that you can read it at your own free time. I know there's a lot of content in there. If you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to me. I don't know if I put my Twitter handle. You can tweet me or email me on, and yeah, I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you have. And finally, have a look at startup.google.com. There's a lot more resources in there for anybody who's thinking about building a startup. Oh yes, let me do that. Twitter _J Kimani. That's me. right? Thank you for inviting me. I hope you enjoy the rest of your DevFest. All right, I see a question from Hubert. What is the impact of making decisions when you want to build a startup? Yes, that's a very good question. Basically what we say is that you should try and make most of the critical decisions when you're getting started. So for example, the decision on the team that you need, the decision on which market you want to start with, that's very, very important. If you start with the wrong market, then your product starts the wrong way. And the problem with not making these decisions early on is that it's very difficult to change as you're moving. So for example, if you launch a product in a country which is not right for your product, then you have to go back to the drawing board, right? If you start off with the wrong backend infrastructure, even basic questions like programming languages, for us as developers, we like new and fancy programming languages. And for the JavaScript developers in the room, for example, there's always a new JavaScript framework. And so if you go with a new framework and then that framework does not have support, or the community is very small, so if you have questions, there's nobody to answer you. If the framework has bugs, there's nobody on GitHub who's fixing this. So it becomes a problem for your company and even hiring people to support that framework. So you need to think about these decisions early on. Should we choose technology before building MVP or after MVP? You should pick technology before. And our recommendation is always go with the tech you're most comfortable with. As a tech founder, programmers have all these stories about, certain languages don't scale, certain languages scale better than others. The best programming language is the one that you know, right? And so when you're starting out, use your existing skill sets to build the MVP. And the good thing is that, as your company grows, and then you realize that your second version of the product needs to be a different platform, then you could always move then, right? I have seen startups start their products on Google Workspace, on spreadsheets, because with spreadsheets now you can go in and program certain functions using AppScript, right? And so you don't even need to build something complicated. You could start off with a backend that is a spreadsheet, use a very, very basic HTML page, connect it to the spreadsheet, collect data from your users. And so use very basic technology when you're starting out, nothing complicated. You don't have to think about containers when you're starting. All right, any